Hello and welcome to my presentation on creating opportunities for online peer interaction in self-directed learning. How we're going to use online spaces to aim for autonomy and autonomy development. My name is Bart Peters. I am a postdoc researcher in applied linguistics at the University of Antwerp in Belgium and a research fellow at the Research Institute for Learner Autonomy Education at Kanda University of International Studies in Japan. I have studied social network impact in foreign language learning, and I have conducted research projects in Belgium, Japan, and South Africa as part of an extensive study on computer-supported collaborative work. Now, diving into the presentation, let's first talk about what language learner autonomy is. Well, learner autonomy is characterized by a readiness to take charge of one's own learning in the service of one's needs and purposes. This entails a capacity and a willingness to act independently and in cooperation with others as a social and responsible person in the learning context. An autonomous learner is an active participant in the social process of learning, but also an active interpreter of new information in terms of what she or he already and uniquely knows. And this is the base of a lot of the research that we at Kanda University of International Studies are doing. That relates, of course, to our teaching and our research practice. Now, one of the ways in which autonomy development has been fostered over the years has been by integrating peer interaction opportunities in the language learning curriculum. But there are a couple of variables affecting the efficacy of peer interaction. Of course, we can talk about proficiency level as well as task type. What kind of tasks are we going to set for our students? Modality of interaction, are we talking about spoken interaction or written interaction, as well as learner relationships? Now, the inherently social nature of peer interaction, which of course has to do with learner relationships, works as a kind of filter through which all of the other factors must pass. At the same time, learners' experience of collaboration and the collaborative tasks also heavily impacts their interpretation and their efficacy of the peer interaction space and what they can do with it. So there are two major aspects here. One is that we have to create spaces in which they can create communities in which they can learn, as well as create tasks that make sense to them or for them in that specific space. Now, for online learning, we can do a couple of things in this regard. So what can educators do online in order to foster autonomy? We can explicitly teach our students strategies, language learning strategies, in order for them to be able to cope with the different challenges they will face. We can have learners keep reflective study logs so they can think and reflect about the steps that they take in their learning process. We can prompt them to self-regulate, communicate with them outside of the online environment. We can provide scaffolding, for instance, opportunities to support other learners and in turn be supported by their peers, and provide opportunities for students to get help when needed. Now, quickly talking about language learning strategies, because that sometimes is a heavily contested topic. I use Oxford's 2017 definition of language learning strategies, and she says language learning strategies are complex, dynamic thoughts and actions selected and used by learners with some degree of consciousness in specific contexts in order to regulate multiple aspects of themselves. And they do so for specific purposes. They want to accomplish language tasks, improve language performance, and enhance long-term proficiency. Now, we have to keep in mind that strategies that learners use, they can vary and are dependent on the learning context, the sociocultural background, as well as learners' personal preferences. And that is actually a way to make the teaching of language learning strategies a little bit more manageable, making it relate to what students are doing, the challenges they are facing, and in the teaching of strategies, make that relate to what students are already doing. Now, we did a study on the use of language learning strategies within an online context. And the context that we're working in is a self-access learning center at Kanda University of International Studies. We already have a lot of support mechanisms built into this self-access learning center, which is even a physical space within the university. And one of those support mechanisms is the effective learning module. It is a module in which we give students weekly tasks and assignments in which they can learn or work on their self-directed learning skills. A big part of it is awareness raising through several units of a module pack or a syllabus, if you want. Weekly feedback from learning advisors in written form, as well as the opportunity to have face-to-face advising sessions with learning advisors on a weekly or a monthly basis. We've integrated this in what we call a structured awareness raising curriculum, in which self-directed learning and awareness raising is part of the everyday practice. We've seen from previous research that participants in our modules generally meet the learning outcomes of the module and are able to use the necessary strategies that apply to them. Now, we wanted to see if in this kind of environment, students could transfer their skills and the knowledge that they have gained to an online environment. So we integrated a Google Classroom platform, an online platform, into the module, and we used it as a peer interaction space. We integrated several prompts to motivate our learners in the module pack, instructions, for instance, after a reflective task, which said that they could share their reflections with their peers on this Google Classroom peer interaction space. We made sure that the online and offline activities were connected so that nothing was happening in isolation. For instance, students could always talk about several tasks they had to do for the module, as well as take the discussions that they had online to their learning advisors to further discuss. There were no learning advisors present online. This was a peer interaction space, but the learning advisors, of course, were available everywhere else. 252 students participated in this study, and we subdivided them in 4 different groups, depending on their language major, over a course of 2 semesters. The data that we used for this study are posts and comments to Google Classroom, 957 in total. The research questions that we asked first are: which strategies do our learners use when collaborating with their peers online for effective learning purposes? And how do our learners' strategy use online relate to autonomy development? We used the textual data as a basis for this study. We used digital conversation analysis of the online engagement, tagging all the different strategies that could be observed on this textual level, as well as social network analysis to calculate and visualize the connections between those strategies to see how all these strategies interrelate, or indeed if they interrelate. Now, going to the results, I would first like you to show you a couple of examples of what our students are talking about. For instance, in this first example, a student is introducing themselves and is referring to one of the tasks for the module. And they say that they tried to take the TOEIC speaking and writing test for the first time, and they ask their fellow students for advice, for instance, how the test was like and what they have to do first. One of the fellow students says, well, why don't you buy the official TOEIC textbook? And then they apologize for not giving a better answer in their own opinion. Another student says, well, you can go to building 6 on the 2nd floor. That's at our university. There are sample TOEIC tests for speaking and writing there. You can take them for free. Why don't you try the sample test? So you can see that in these kind of talks and these kind of discussions, students are sharing their goals, their objectives, also share resources and interact socially and effectively as well. In the next example, the student says that they or gives a tip on how to use Twitter as a resource in their language learning trajectory. They introduce the topic, they give some tips on how to use Twitter, for instance, how to switch between English and other languages. And in the comment section, people say, well, I've never known that Twitter is good for language learning. I will try it, and thank you for telling me. The student who made the original post said, I'm really glad to hear that. It's not always about the tasks or about learning, however. We also see posts and comments like this. I went to Osaka for 4 days. How did you do? This is from a student who went on a trip during one of the breaks. Someone says, I went to Yokohama with my boyfriend. Someone else says, Osaka is my second hometown. I'm glad to hear that you visit. So you see that it's not only about learning about the tasks or about the module, it's also an opportunity for them to socially bond. And we also see these things connect to each other. For instance, in this example, I want to study grammar and vocabulary as much as I can. Also, I will read a lot of books and I'll talk to my friends in English. I want to try everything I can in QS, our university. Another student says, let's try harder and improve communication skills together. We're on fire. So here you can see it's like goals, objective, as well as positive reinforcements within this peer interaction space. Now, we see a couple of overall trends in this peer interaction process in all the different groups. And this relates to three major awareness phases within autonomy development. And first one is awareness of approaches to learning, where we see that students talk about planning, they evaluate and orchestrate their strategy use, asking which strategies, for instance, work for a specific task, brainstorming about these strategies, discussing goals and objectives, etc. Second phase is awareness of facilities, rules, and resources, where we see that students evaluate the resources and share them. They organize their learning trajectory, thinking about, for instance, the next steps to take. They manage materials and navigate the learning context, for instance, sharing tips and tricks on how to talk to teachers, learning advisors, where to find specific resources, facilities, and people, etc. Then last phase is awareness of self, where students pay attention to others, monitor and evaluate their performance, not only in the module, but also in the peer interaction process. They express positive emotions and gratitude, they acknowledge each other, and they share personal stories. Now, diving deeper into all these different strategies, we did a social network analysis of all the different strategies that we have observed. And let me share you two of them. This figure is the network of all the different strategies that we see for one of the groups, the group of Chinese, Spanish, and Korean. 61 participants in this group. And when you look closely at the figure, we can see a couple of trends emerge. For instance, when students introduce new topics or questions to the group, they often share personal introductions, which is S24 in this graph. That is followed by stories about their pastime or their hobbies, which is S23. And these two topics are used most commonly to start a new conversation with people. They also ask for strategies, and they also discuss goals and objectives in this regard, which is A1 and A6. Now, in the comment section, we see different trends emerge. Students here tend to acknowledge one another, which is S19, and they express what they like about the statements or resources shared by other people, which is S22. So in the initial phases, in the posts, we see that there's a lot of awareness of self, as well as awareness of approaches to learning to start a conversation with other people. But in the comment section, we see predominantly that students use strategies that are adjacent to awareness of self. This makes this group a very sociable one, but also one that is aware of all the approaches and strategies that they can use. Now compare that to one of the other groups, which is the group of English, the Department of English, 78 participants, and we can see a couple of different dynamics here. The strategy that is used most often to initiate a conversation here is F14, which is learners asking for information on resources. That is followed by discussing learning goals and objectives, which is A1, and asking for information on strategies and strategies for learning, which is A6. In the comment section, they primarily focus on acknowledging one another, which is S19, and expressing gratitude, which is S21. We see in this group that to initiate conversations, there is more focus on awareness of facilities, as well as awareness of approaches to learning compared to the previous group. However, in the comment section, we see that this awareness of self still is very, very dominant, which makes this group, of course, also very sociable, but more focused on the module and the outcomes of the module. Now, overall, in all the different groups that we have observed, they tend to use a set of strategies and for specific purposes. First of all, they really want to connect with their peers on different levels. They exchange personal experiences and resources, and they advise others on the opportunities, spaces, and people at the university. And related to strategies, we see that they conceptualize ideas, provide reasoning for their actions, exhibit a willingness to understand others, and activate their own knowledge when dealing with the task. And this is really focusing on task. This is task related. On the other hand, they also generate and maintain motivation by creating a positive environment for others. They grow accustomed to the context of higher education, and they activate supportive emotions, beliefs, and attitudes. And that is a couple of general findings for all the groups that we have observed. Now, this focus on providing acknowledgement and positive reinforcement in the comments section seems to be a universal factor across the groups that we have in this study. Learners take the opportunity to share personal experience, feelings, emotions, and opinions, in addition to task-related interaction. And we've seen that students often take this opportunity to break the ice, to start talking to other people and to make new connections. But at the same time, they also take it upon them to keep face. They often give positive reinforcements and share positive emotions. We don't see a lot of negativity or negative emotions within our groups. Of course, this can be really idiosyncratic. This can be because our students act that way. So we cannot generalize this yet. This, of course, has some implications for design as well for autonomy development. We see that learners can achieve the learning outcomes of our structured awareness-raising curriculum. And we see that online peer interaction and the advising in language learning can mutually benefit from one another as learners' online engagement keeps them actively discussing and thinking through their actions and plans on a daily and weekly basis. For autonomy development, as we want to create active learners, this is one of the ways to do it. While advising sessions can help them reflect accurately and help them set out and follow up on learning plans. So not only being active, but also being aware of all the different phases, of all the different aspects of the language learning trajectory. In a follow-up study, we do need to look into how we can foster more in-depth discussions between peers about planning as well as learning gains, because we felt that that was lacking a little bit in our study. Now, to conclude, autonomous learners, ones that we're aiming for, they don't only have to have the ability and freedom, but also the desire to control their own learning. The goal here is to develop co-ownership, create spaces and design spaces that allow students to form a community and to form social bonds with their peers, as well as have relevant tasks for them to engage in the target language, as well as in their own learner trajectory. For us, in our study and in our experience, online peer interaction plus advising in language learning equals active engagement with others on a regular basis, as well as being supported to critically approach the plans you make and the goals you want to achieve. And in our view, this is a good, valid way in how to support students and learners in developing language learning autonomy. Thank you very much. If you want to know more about me and my work, you can scan my QR code. These are the references that I have used. And if you have any questions, I will be very happy to answer them.